Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me as always. Another week of the college football season in the books. The calendar has flipped to November. We are in the home stretch of the college football season. Before we know it, we'll be talking playoffs, we'll be talking bowl season. But here at Saturday to Sunday, we will continue to cover it wire to wire. Week 10 of the NFL season concluding tonight. Week 9 of the NFL season concluding tonight as well, with the Kansas City Chiefs and Tampa Bay Bucks going at it. So much to talk about from the NFL side of it in terms of checking in on those rookies, stock report in terms of your dynasty leagues. But let's start where we always start, the 2025 NFL Draft Report. As usual, a lot to talk about. And as usual, we start at the quarterback position because I feel like it has been an up and down roller coaster for quarterback prospects. I think it is clear that the 2025 class is not like the 2024 class where we had, Caleb and Jaden, Drake May, and, those guys were looked at as elite level type franchise quarterback prospects. I think in this year's draft class, we're going to see a couple go at the top of the draft. But as we've talked about, like that list has kind of been in flux the whole year. It started with Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers and Shadu Sanders. And then for a while, Jalen Milroe was in the mix. And then Cam Ward has been ascending the whole year. We thought maybe some other guys like Garrett Nussmeier or Drew Allar could step up. Nussmeier, I think, still intriguing. I think Drew Allar has kind of settled back a little bit and hasn't really been able to keep that momentum going. We saw that this past week as well. But let's kind of start the quarterback position. Again, Cam Ward continues to be the most impressive, continues to put up the most gaudy stats, whether it's him or Ashton Genty. I'm not sure how one of those guys aren't the Heisman Trophy winner, and Ward's doing this on an undefeated team that's probably going to go to the playoff. So I think it's going to end up being Cam Ward at the quarterback position over Ashton Genty, both well-deserving. This past week, Ward 400 yards, 5 more touchdowns. There's a lot to like about his game, but not at the level of what we saw at the prospects last year. First off, he's a little bit of an older prospect, right? This is his third collegiate team. He doesn't have the ideal, size and frame. There's still times that he's improved his decision making. He's reduced his turnover worthy plays, but there's still aspects of his game. We've even seen, while Miami's remained undefeated, we've seen sometimes that he's had poor halves and had to come back, which I personally like that trait. To me, it shows that he's able to overcome adversity, poor starts, put it at a disadvantage. We know things aren't going to be perfect in the NFL. So when I've seen a quarterback prospect handle adversity well, I kind of like that. But at the same time, there's still aspects of his game that I think lead to certain questions. I think he's right up there with Shadu Sanders. I've talked about it for the last couple of weeks, that I think they've kind of separated themselves now into a tier of 2. Another impressive performance from him nonetheless, as he continues to solidify his status as one of the top quarterback prospects in the 2025 NFL Draft. Jackson Dart, 6 touchdowns and 515 yards in Ole Miss's victory. Jackson Dart is a guy who was generating some buzz, I think, before the season started. And then I kind of feel like it flatlined a little bit. And now I do wonder, with some of these guys struggling, if he finishes the season strong, where does that kind of put him in this mix too? I've never been a guy that looked at Dart and thought the first round was in the mix. I don't even really think the second round's in the mix. I think he's more of that guy who could maybe sneak into the third round and a team takes a chance on him. Maybe they hit lightning, they strike lightning, and maybe he becomes a starter. If not, he's a quality backup. A team might take a chance on that somewhere in round 3. We saw not that long ago that year that, we saw Malik Willis go round 3. We saw Desmond Ridder go round 3. We saw Matt Corral go round 3. I kind of think Jackson Dart kind of is in that level. I think the scheme at Ole Miss really creates a lot of those gaudy statistics. I know some people like him a little bit more than me, but I do think it's interesting if he finishes out the season strong and kind of builds, stacks up big game after big game when so many other prospects are struggling down the stretch. Does that kind of stand out a little bit and make some teams intrigued with him because he did put up that production? You know me, if you've been listening long enough, I'm not a huge production guy. I think it could be, very misleading to, look at just the production, the supporting cast, the coaching, the scheme, I think so much goes into that. So when it comes to Jackson Dart, I do believe that some evaluators will definitely like him more than me. I still have my reservations about him. I still think he's more, ceiling of a third round prospect than a first or a second round prospect. The other names I have on this list, it wasn't a strong showing for them. Obviously, that big Penn State-Ohio State game, Penn State offense really could not get much going. Drew Allard, 12 of 20, 146 yards and interception. We kind of have talked about him a lot this year, that we kind of wanted to see that crescendo. He had some good performances when Penn State wasn't really facing a stiffer competition. We kind of wanted to see how he could handle, bigger games. This was not a good performance from him in this game against Ohio State. I still think raw traits and physical traits, there's a lot to like about his game, but I still think teams are going to look at him as more of a developmental type guy. Maybe they consider somewhere on day 2, but not a finished product, not a guy that they're willing to pull the trigger on in somewhere in round 1, even though he's got that prototypical size and frame, and he's got athleticism, and he's got arm talent. I still think we need to see more from him this year. And when he puts this type of performance, 12 of 20, 146 yards, no touchdowns and interception, even when Penn State has played well this year, they've kind of asked him to be more game manager than the focal point of that offense. So in the games that they win, he's just a game manager. And then games that they lose, he can't rise to the occasion and put up a bigger performance. To me, I have, that raises some concerns, right? I still like the physical traits. I still think he's an interesting and intriguing developmental guy, but I don't see a path where he's a first round guy. I don't see a path where he's a top 50 guy. I think unless we see more and different type of stuff from him down the stretch of this year, I still think he's more of a guy somewhere on, the latter part of the day 2 mix, just based on his intriguing athletic traits. Carson Beck, 3 more interceptions. I know Georgia came back and beat Florida, but I mean, it's stunning to see what Carson Beck has morphed into. This is a guy who his decision-making and his mental processing, those are some of his top level traits heading into this year. We knew he didn't have top level athleticism. We knew he didn't have, top level arm talent. That stuff was average at best. But what was intriguing about Carson Beck was the going through progressions, the mental processing, the decision making, showing that he can rise up to the occasion. And we have seen Carson Beck make really poor decisions in a lot of football games this year. We've seen the turnover worthy plays really skyrocket for him this year. That, I had my reservations about him last year when people thought if he came out, he could have maybe pushed to be around 1 quarterback last year. And then over the summer, like I've mentioned, like I kind of got into him as like, what, for this class, maybe he is the best in this class. There's less questions maybe surrounding his game than a guy like Shadu Sanders. But Carson Beck has done nothing this year to make me think that if I was an NFL team, that'd be the guy that I think I want to invest an early first round pick in to be my franchise quarterback. He's playing at Georgia. They are surrounded by elite 5-star prospects all around them. And he has looked as inconsistent and as poor at times this year that if he was to be put into an NFL team, he'd be put on probably a poor team with a poor supporting cast. He does not come across as a guy that I would feel comfortable that he would rise up the team around his play. So I really struggle with where Carson Beck is. I think he's somewhere on the day 2 mix, but I have a lot of questions about, are we still just basing it off of what we thought about him before the year started? And if we just evaluate him on what he's done this year and his struggles, is he even a day 2 prospect? Like I'm sure he'll still end up there, but I think there's legitimate concerns about where he should now go in the NFL draft. Miller Moss, obviously early in the year, I thought he was ascending. That great week 1 against Garrett Nussmeier and LSU. And he's had ups and downs this year, but very inconsistent as well. Obviously, his first year starting, 293 yards, 2 touchdowns, and another 3 interceptions from him in USC's loss to Washington. So I think he's another guy that, there's intrigue to his game. There's some aspects of his game that I think are NFL worthy, but then the inconsistencies and the up and down, I think, leave a lot of question marks as well. So he's another guy that we haven't seen that crescendo building. So you start to do this and you're like, okay, we got Shadu and Cam Ward in round one. Is there anybody else in the round one mix? I still think Jalen Milroe could put his name in that situation. But after that, I'm not sure there's anybody else who's going to go round one. And then I'm not even sure anybody else is top of round two. So it's definitely a weak class. We know there's some intrigue at the top. We know there's some intrigue for the following year's class, that it's going to be really interesting to kind of see what teams near the top of the draft do in regard to this class. Do they overdraft Cam Ward or Shadu Sanders because they need a quarterback? After those two are gone, does anybody else get pushed up into the round one just because a team is desperate? And when teams make desperate decisions about their quarterbacks, it usually is a colossal failure. And I think there's going to be a lot of teams in that mix, right? Whether it's Carolina wanting to move on from Bryce Young, whether it's the Giants, other teams that are going to be faced with that decision. Maybe they're into Shadu Sanders. Maybe they're into Cam Ward. But if they're not into them, are they willing to wait? And if those guys, they are into them, but they don't have an opportunity to take them, then what do they do when they so desperately need a quarterback? There's not going to be a lot of guys out there. Sam Darnold may be available. Anthony Richardson may be available in a trade. Bryce Young may be available in a trade. And then you have veteran guys like Jameis Winston will be available, and prospects like and players like that. It's going to be fascinating to see the teams in the top 10 that are in need of a quarterback and how they handle the top of this first round in April for the 2025 NFL draft. If we take this to the running back position, Ashton Jeanty continues to just amaze, 149 yards, 2 touchdowns. I think the question a lot of teams are going to have to ask themselves is, in what appears to be a very strong running back class, obviously wait and see how many underclassmen end up declaring, but what appears to be a very strong running back class. And when you see guys like Tyrone Tracy, who went in the 5th round this year to the Giants, performing really, really well, the question becomes what is Ashton Jeanty worth? How is he worth a top 15 pick? Is he worth the top 20 pick? Is a team going to pull the trigger on Jeanty, or are they going to say, we're going to pivot to a different position and then get a different running back in round 2, round 3, or round 4, where there's still going to be really good backs in this class? I kind of get the sense that maybe he falls a little bit in round 1 just because of that. But I do think there are teams that maybe would be picking in like the 18 to 30 range that look at Jeanty as a dual versatile offensive weapon that could add a different dynamic to their team, and they'd be willing to make that investment. Like, I don't think Detroit has any buyer's remorse on Jahmyr Gibbs and what he brings to that team. So I do think a team is going to look at Jeanty very similar to how the Lions looked at Gibbs, as this unique offensive piece, because we haven't even seen a lot of Jeanty, the receiver, this year, and he's a prolific pass catcher and receiver as well. So I do think there's going to be a team that all it takes is one team to look at him and say what he could bring to our offense collectively. So I still think he goes somewhere in round 1, but I do think the question is, a lot of teams will be asking themselves, do we invest in Jeanty in round 1? If so, how high in round 1? Or do we pivot and go to a different position and say, you know what, we're going to get a really good back in round 2, round 3, round 4, maybe even some fall to round 5. And they say, okay, we don't have to make that first round investment in Jeanty at the running back position. It's going to be an interesting conversation, right? We have this every time a special talent comes around that's worthy of round 1. We have this discussion of whether or not it's warranted or not, with how many good running backs come out, out of nowhere from day 3, round 3, other spots in day 2, that I think it makes it hard for these teams to pull the trigger in round 1. We talked about that Ohio State-Penn State game. In that game, Quinshon Judkins, 14 carries, 95 yards. Listen, he hasn't put up the gaudy production, because between TreVeyon Henderson there and, a bunch of elite receivers, it's just not, he's not the focal point of that offense like he was in the past. So we're not seeing these gaudy production, but I do think he's a guy that'll be in that top 3, top 4 running back mix, possibly RB2. I still think he's more of like a top 50 player than a round 1 guy, but I do think, the gap between him and Jeanty might be about a round. And I think that's warranted for just the big play explosiveness that Genti offers that Judkins doesn't. But there's a lot to like about Judkins' game. Love the vision, love the contact balance, the leg drive. He puts it together. We saw an impressive performance from him against Penn State, even only in those limited 14 carries. Nicholas Singleton really struggled to get going in that game against Ohio State. But what I like about Singleton's game is he is a guy that could play all 3 downs. While he didn't get anything going in the run game this past week, did have 6 catches for 54 yards. Teams are looking for those 3 down type running backs that can impact the game in a variety of ways. I do think Singleton can be a pretty effective receiver as well. We know he's got great level athleticism. We know he's a big play threat waiting to happen. And his ability to be a weapon in the pass game also really solidifies his draft stock. I think somewhere in that round 3 or early round 4 mix probably for Singleton. Jordan James out of Oregon, a guy that we've talked about here or there, a guy I'll be adding to the notebook, as the season concludes, 117 yards and 1 touchdown. Oregon just been rolling, but Jordan James is a guy that I think, could be somewhere in that day 3 mix for sure. Clemson, Phil Maffa, we haven't really talked about him since the summer, 171 yards, 2 touchdowns. Now, he's not going to be for everybody, but if you're looking for a power, interior, physical runner, great contact balance, leg drive, play strength, all that, you're talking about a guy like Maffa somewhere in that round 4 to round 6 range. Really could add, a thunder to a team's lightning if they're looking for that. So there's aspects of his game that are very intriguing. Caleb Johnson out of Iowa continues to put up the best production of arguably any running back in the country, not named Ashton Genti, 135 yards and 3 touchdowns. I think he has put himself now in the mix to be a top 8, top 5, top 10 running back in this class, depending on how things shake out. I think he's put himself in that round 3, round 4 mix. Another tough physical interior runner, but really impressive what he's been doing. Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee just continues. Obviously, Tennessee, really impressive team. Sampson continues to put up really gaudy stats, running the ball, 142 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think he's put himself on the mix to be somewhere in that round 4 to round 6 range as well. And then we've talked about him sporadically this year, but Raheem Rocket Sanders, this past week in the upset over Texas A&M, the South Carolina running back, 144 yards and 2 touchdowns, 5 catches, 92 yards. Raheem Sanders, once upon a time, day 2 type running back prospect. Then last year, basically almost undraftable, now has put himself in the mix again to be somewhere maybe in that round 3 to round 5 range. It was great to see Sanders kind of rejuvenate himself this year and put himself back in the mix, showing that breakaway ability for a man his size, showing that he can handle a heavy workload, that he can be functional in the pass game as well. A lot to like about what Raheem Sanders has been doing this year for South Carolina. If we take this over to the pass catchers, again, back to that Ohio State Penn State game, Emeka Egbuka, 31 yards and a touchdown. Again, continue to say, for me, he's locked in as my number 4, number 5 wide receiver. I don't see him falling out of my top 5. I think he's just too good of a route runner. He's got the route running chops. He's got athleticism. He's got speed. He can win at all 3 levels of the field. A lot to like about Egbuka's game. Name we have not talked about at all is Ole Miss senior wide receiver Jordan Watkins, 5'11", 200. This past week, 8 catches, 254 yards, and 5 touchdowns on the season. He's got 25 catches, 549 yards, and 7 touchdowns. But you put up a performance like that. I talked before about Jackson Dart having 515 yards and 6 touchdowns. 5 of those touchdowns went to Jordan Watkins. Impressive performance by Watkins. Had to shout him out on here. We probably will see him, I think, somewhere in the All-Star circuit, probably like the Shrine Bowl or the NFLPA Bowl, maybe outside chance the Senior Bowl as well, if he finishes the season strong. We talk about Cam Ward a lot, and I think sometimes we forget to bring up Xavier Restrepo. 8 catches, 146 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I get it. He's going to be slot only at the next level. But all this guy does is produce. All he does is get open. He's got big playability also from the slot. The footwork, the route running chops, the separation quickness. Restrepo, very impressive in that regards. I know there's concerns about the overall athleticism. I know there's concerns about the size and the frame. But the production that he's put up at that size, at that frame, his ability to get open, I think makes him a really intriguing slot prospect, whether it's round 3, whether it's round 4. I think a team is going to look at him and say, he's a guy who can add a different element to our game. Maybe they have a couple big outside receivers and they're looking for that slot only to complement well. I think a team's going to fall in love with him. The toughness that he plays with, you can use him in a variety of ways. He's got yak ability. So there's a lot to like about his game. I think he's now catapulted himself somewhere in that round 3, round 4 mix. Elijah Sarrett out of Indiana, the 6'2", 209-pound junior. This past week, almost 59 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the season, 37 catches, 649 yards and 5 touchdowns. He's a guy that really has catapulted his draft stock during this college football season. I think he's going to be a guy that we're going to be talking about in the second half of the college football season. We're going to be talking about him in the pre-draft process for sure. Let's take this over to the tight end discussion. It's the same guys I'm talking about every week. Warren out of Penn State, 4 catches, 47 yards. But I love the fact that they found the way to get him the ball. 3 carries, 47 yards. The more versatility you have as a tight end, I think the better your draft stock is. We talked about Warren. I think he's right in the mix to be the first tight end taken with Colston Loveland, who I continue to shout out for his production with that Michigan offense. So poor. Loveland continues to deliver week in and week out. They have far separated themselves from any other tight end in this draft class, whether it's Warren 1, Loveland 2, or vice versa. I think they're both top 50 type prospects. I think we'll see both of them go off the board in the top 50. Teams are looking for those guys that can create mismatches. In Warren's case, he could be a very complete tight end as a really good blocker too at that size and frame. So more of those guys just kind of solidifying their status for that. A couple comments came in, talk about some college prospects. Let me just kind of hit on them. One, thanks Ryan Major for the comment. I'd love to have the Pats pick up Damian Martinez, who is a prospective 5th-round pick, or Jaden Ott, also good late value. The thing with Damian Martinez and Jaden Ott, now I'm a big Jaden Ott guy. I like Damian Martinez. Sometimes I do think he might be a little overvalued. I'm bigger on Ott. I think both of those guys are going to be probably day 3 picks. We just don't get too many guys in the top 100. So I think Ott has a chance to be in that 4th, 5th round. I think Martinez has a chance, whether it's the Pats, like you mentioned, or other teams. I think they're going to provide really intriguing value. I think there's going to be a lot of good running backs that could be productive, right? We saw Tyrone Tracy and what he's done for the Giants as a 5th round pick. Jaden Ott is probably going to be one of my guys that I talk about a lot in the pre-draft process. I really like Ott's game, big playability, the receiving capabilities. I like Damian Martinez, tough physical runner. Both of those guys just kind of add to the mix of guys that I think could make this a really deep and strong running back class. Thank you so much for the comment, Ryan. Really appreciate it. Let's spin this over to the NFL rookie report for this week. Start with the quarterbacks. Caleb Williams, he had that stretch of a couple good games. Chicago was playing teams that, really have struggled in terms of pass defense. And now as they started to face some teams that are playing better defense, we saw him struggle against Washington. Obviously, the ending of that game, very flukish with them getting the loss, but he did not put up production against Washington last week. This week, really struggled against Arizona, which was a little surprising. So as we kind of expected, Chicago is not a great team yet. They've definitely made a lot of strides. And Caleb is a young quarterback who is going to have his ups and downs. Not everybody's going to hit the ground running and look as prolific as Jaden Daniels, who we'll get to momentarily. But obviously some struggles from Caleb Williams over the last couple of weeks. I do think he will, figure it out. And we're going to kind of live with those ups and downs in year 1. And I think by year 2, year 3, we'll start to see some of those go by the wayside a little bit. But we'll continue to check in on Caleb Williams. Drake May obviously led New England down the field to tie it up, to send it to overtime. Listen, Drake May is not playing with much. We could talk about maybe Chicago is a better team in terms of, but they still have areas to build around Caleb Williams. Well, New England's got everything to build around Drake May. Like, the level of disparity between what Caleb Williams is playing with and what Drake May is playing with is night and day. So the fact that Drake May has came in and has looked as good and as functional as he has in the early going, I think speaks volumes about the level of prospect he is. I love that he has shown the ability to kind of elevate his teammates. I think that's what I always loved about Drake May. I love the athleticism. This past week, he had 95 yards rushing. I think that's a very under the radar aspect to Drake May's game, is that athleticism. He's very much in a mold of a Daniel Jones in terms of his rushing capabilities, obviously far superior in terms of his arm talent, in terms of his ability to deliver the football to all areas of the field, the arm talent, much superior prospect than a guy like Daniel Jones. But in terms of the athleticism, I do think Drake May has that level of athleticism, whether it's Daniel Jones, Josh Allen. That really adds a different dynamic to Drake May, the prospect. And as we think here, as he continues to develop and refine, he has that athleticism to also fall back on as well. I'm going to be fun to watch him the rest of this year and see how New England kind of builds the team up around him in the offseason. Jaden Daniels, I mean, obviously as a Giants fan, anybody who listens to the show knows I'm a big Giants fan. Jaden Daniels, I don't want to use the word unstoppable because that's not fair for any rookie, but he just can win in so many different ways. He's got the athleticism and big playability of a Lamar Jackson or a Michael Vick, but he's so much more advanced as a thrower than either of them were when they first came into the league. Now, both Vic and then Lamar in particular really have really evolved in terms of their passing ability, but Jaden, not playing with a great cast around him, and he's single-handedly been the reason why, they are where they are right now at 7-2. But if you give him an opening, he takes off and picks up chunk yards very easily too. Like, he eats up ground very fast. He can get the ball out quickly and read defenses and get it, into his playmaker's hands. But he also is great at throwing the deep ball. There's not a lot that he can't do. Defending him is almost impossible. And he's only a rookie this year, 9 games into his career, but it's remarkable what Jaden is doing. At the running back position, Tyrone Tracy continues to be the bell cow there for the Giants. It's crazy to think this was a 5th-round pick. Weekly rankings, just for redraft, you're going to see Tyrone Tracy in most top 15s. You start to make dynasty lists. Where do you start to put him in dynasty lists? Because he's probably hovering around 20 to 23 right now, even in dynasty rankings. In terms of rookie running back rankings from last year, okay, Jonathan Brooks won. I'm not ready to put him over Trey Benson, who I'm going to talk about momentarily, who I still think can be very good. But right now, I don't see how anybody in Dynasty can value Blake Corum ahead of Tyrone Tracy. Blake Corum is not getting that job from Kyren Williams anytime soon. Kyren Williams is a flat-out stud. Marshawn Lloyd has been injured the whole year, and, they could get out of that Josh Jacobs contract after 1 year, but are they? It's not that unreasonable of a contract. They probably bring him there. We haven't seen anything out of Marshawn Lloyd yet, so I'm not ready to I can't put him over him. And then, you got Jalen Wright. Okay, interesting prospect, but Miami's got Devin Achane. So Wright's going to step up and probably replace Raheem Mostert, but the Giants might have found the real diamond in the rough. Like, I was at the forefront of saying he reminded me a lot of college Alvin Kamara, David Johnson. I went on the Harris Football Podcast. I touted him on there. I touted him here. There were so many other people. Some of my most trusted people that I look for their evaluations. Greg Cosell loved them. Lance Zierlein loved him. Those are arguably my 2 favorite evaluators in all of the NFL draft, world. And they both love Tyrone Tracy. Dave Brugler was a big fan. So right now, Tyrone Tracy is my 3rd rookie running back from that class. And I think in dynasty rankings, he's got to be pushing his way very much into the top 20 mix. I think he's going to get a real chance to be the Giants, starting running back for the foreseeable future based on what we've seen this year, as he's still learning and developing at the position as well. And he's got 3-down capabilities, former wide receiver at Iowa. Rome Odunze, 5 catches, 104 yards. We're starting to see him, more routes run, more targets. He's kind of emerging there. As he's emerging, I'll talk about him later, but DJ Moore's kind of going the other way. Keenan Allen, the veteran presence there. But, Rome Odunze is kind of emerging there. And I think in terms of dynasty world, I think we're having it's having a negative effect on DJ Moore unless Caleb Williams can really get going. Xavier Leggett, obviously now with Deontay Johnson gone, he's the center of attention. Listen, I like Leggett a lot. I do think Carolina is still going to look to add a true alpha wide receiver, whether it's T. Higgins, whether it's another wide receiver in free agency or a big trade or another guy in the draft. So I know Xavier Leggett, the thought of him, I just don't know if he's going to be the true alpha there. And if they go out and make a big investment in free agency or trade to try to get another big time wide receiver there to pair with Xavier Leggett, that would impact his overall. But nice to see him find the end zone again. Not putting up gaudy stats, but I think that's more of his surrounding and the lack of pass volume there for Carolina, but finding the end zone there. And he's got a bright future as well. We saw Jatavian Sanders, 4 catches, 87 yards. We saw Theo Johnson, 3 catches, 51 yards and a touchdown. Listen, we know Theo Johnson, big-time athleticism. He's had a lot of bad drops this year. So I've watched every play of Theo Johnson this year. There's been times that I literally have went to my phone texting people saying, get him out of the lineup. Like, he just drops too many passes. He's not ready for this big of a role. And then no sooner do I say that, you see that athleticism, with a 45-yard touchdown, where he attacked the seam and got vertical. That's what he offers, that big play potential, because he does have good athleticism. He's still a very inexperienced pass catcher. There was, he didn't get a lot of use at Penn State, but there's a lot to like about his game. I just think, there's still a lot of refinement and development needed before he's any type of consistent starter at the NFL level, and definitely in terms of the fantasy aspect of it. If we take this over to the Fantasy Dynasty Report for this week, couple things I wanted to hit on. The Anthony Richardson benching. My thoughts on that is I think it's just way too fast. Like, I'm not sure what Indianapolis is doing. Like, they're not a playoff caliber team this year. This wasn't like years. This wasn't like his second full year where it's like, okay, you got to move on from him. This wasn't what it looked like for Cleveland with Deshaun Watson. I'm baffled by how quickly teams, Carolina did it with Bryce Young, now that he's back in there, but they said this is not just like a 1 or 2 game thing. I'm sure at some point they go back to him, but it's kind of staggering that, like, if he would have played all last year, showed no growth and development, then struggled out of the gate this year, I would understand it. But this is a player that had very limited starts in college. You chose to invest in him in the top 5 of the NFL draft. He showed glimpses of greatness last year prior to his injury. And now we knew there was development and refinement needed in terms of his passing acumen. And now to pull the bench him right now, I just don't understand what they're thinking there. Like, what's the advantage? And if I was somebody in Dynasty, and if I was, because he has to go all the way down now. He has to go to like the 20s or the 25 area in dynasty rankings. You just have to put him there right now with the uncertainty surrounding him, especially as we've seen guys like Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold. If you're in a 2-quarterback or super flex league, you got to value guys like Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield, who are going to get real opportunities to be starters moving forward. Baker's already found his home. I think Sam Darnold is playing himself into a legitimate starting role, and we'll see where that ends up. But I would actually try to buy Anthony Richardson low if that opportunity arose in a dynasty league, whether it's in Indianapolis or whether another team comes knocking. Another team is going to give him a chance. We know the athleticism and that aspect that he can bring to fantasy circles. If the passing can come along, if he can be put with the right coach and the right scheme. As somebody as a Giants fan, I've been talking about it as soon as they bench Anthony Richardson, that he'd be the guy if I was the Giants. If they're not sold on Shadu Sanders and whether he can, fit New York with everything that comes, if they don't get an opportunity for Cam Ward, I would aggressively try to go get Anthony Richardson. I wouldn't give up my top 5 or top 10 pick for him, but I'd aggressively try to find an alternate way to get Anthony Richardson, give him all next year as the starter, see if Brian Daboll can develop him. This is the guy that took a lot of this raw athleticism and traits of Josh Allen and kind of really morphed it into the player Josh Allen is now. And I'm not saying that's definitely the path that Anthony Richardson could take, because every prospect is different, but we've seen Brian Daboll do it with a extremely athletic, unrefined in terms of the passing stuff player in Josh Allen, that you would hope he can do the same for Anthony Richardson and put him in put him in position to succeed as that development happened. I'd give that a year, and then if it didn't work out, then you try to look for a quarterback in the better 2026 class. But the Giants wouldn't be the only team that would be thinking that. There's other teams that would be thinking that way for sure if it actually, leads to the Colts legitimately thinking that they're gonna, trade him, which I think would be stunning. At the running back position, we talked about David Montgomery when he got his reworked contract. I think we got to talk about Alvin Kamara. What he's doing this year is remarkable. But the fact that they reworked his contract, he's probably going to be in New Orleans for a couple more years. His ability to continue to play at a high level at his age, and when you can add in his receiving capabilities, I think he has more value than most 29-year-old running backs would have in Dynasty. Again, assuming that for Dynasty, running backs are really looking at small 2-year windows. The rest of this year, I think he's going to be a high RB1. If he could stay healthy going into next year, I think he should still be valued as probably an RB1 just for the following year. So I think his dynasty value should be somewhere in that like maybe 12 to 18 range at the running back position. But some people are so concerned about the age, or some people have a more 3 to 5 year window. And I do not think that is how you should be looking at the running backs in any way, shape, or form. That I think Kamara could be a rock solid another year and a half dynasty asset, and that can go a long way if you're a team contending. At the wide receiver position, a couple of things. Chris Olave, really scary concussion. I think I read somewhere that was his sixth concussion of his career. That is something, that's scary to think about. I know we've had conversations about Tua. Like, should he contemplate, how many more are you willing to risk out there? I think that same starts to come up for a guy like Chris Olave, who plays a position that every catch, he's being, people are going after him. He could get hit, that's a concern. I think in the back of your mind, when you're having conversations about dynasty value, you at least got to consider this guy's had 6 concussions. Like, as he gets them, how much more cautious are they going to be? Could it be the one that, makes him end his career? We don't want that to be the case, but at least it's something that we have to acknowledge that is out there, just like we did for Tua as well. Jalen Waddle stock down, and this hurts as someone who's a big Waddle guy. I think I'd still be willing to buy him cheap, but I mean, this is a guy who not that long ago people were thinking was a top 12, top 14 dynasty wide receiver, top 16, top 18 bare minimum. And now does he even belong in top 24s? I think it's a legitimate question. Stock up on Zay Flowers. People had concerns, I think, about how much of an impactful receiver he could be, but he's shown that he can win on all 3 levels of the field: short, intermediate, vertical. Great separation, quickness. Him and Lamar are really clicking this year. I think stock up. I think Zay Flowers is probably not regarded as high as he should be in dynasty circles. We saw Jackson Smith in the Jigba explosion this week. Could have had 250 yards if it wasn't for some penalties, but he ended up with like 180 and 2 touchdowns. Listen, DK Metcalf is great at what he brings to the table, but they need to start morphing this offense to really feature Jackson Smith and Najigba. And maybe we finally get the Jackson Smith and Najigba we thought we were going to get coming out of college, as a guy who could really, even from inside the slot a lot, could be a very Cooper Kupp-esque in terms of a focal point of an offense, even out of the slot predominantly. I think we've seen some glimpses of it this year. It'll be interesting to kind of see once DK gets back if we see some change in terms of the pass offense. Do more of it run through Jackson Smith and the Jigba? I think it should. If he has a down week or two, I think you could use it as an opportunity, to maybe say, okay, is his value a little bit lower? Do I feel like, not that long ago we were saying maybe we shouldn't only be valuing him as a wide receiver parade, but he has these explosion weeks, and we kind of, revisit the fact that he was regarded as an elite prospect at Ohio State. So I think it's a tough spot there. I think I'd still want him on my team. And if the value wasn't too extreme, obviously after this week, it will be, but things are, I think, have a natural ebb and flow. We saw him explode, I think, in week 2. And then all of a sudden he was very ho-hum. So I think if the opportunity arises where you can buy him at a wide receiver revalue, I think I would still be willing to buy him there, because I think that's his floor, and I think his ceiling still could be a top 20-ish wide receiver if more of the pass offense kind of flows through him. And I mentioned it before, I think stock down on DJ Moore. Rome Odunze stock's going up. Caleb Williams hasn't shown us the ability yet to bring create a lot of value for his fantasy wide receivers. DJ Moore is a little bit older than we think. So I'm not saying sell him off, but I do think where his value was heading into the season, it has had to come down a little bit for sure. So there it is, guys. The Fantasy Dynasty Report for Week 9, the NFL Rookie Report for Week 9, and then the NFL Draft Report for Week 10 of the college football season. If you're enjoying the content, please get over to the website, SS Football, fastest and easiest way to get there. For $9.99, check out all of our premium content. You get the scouting notebook, you get the rankings notebook, and then in April, you get the draft projections notebook. It is the best way to support the show and help us continue to do what we do here at Saturday to Sunday. So, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.